day I graduated college in 2005, I decided to start a rental company. It took a few years until it became successful enough to be my full-time job, but now it's all I do. My hope is to help you by sharing my knowledge.
So, you want to get into the rental industry, but it is expensive to get into and to start making a lot of money. But I have a cheaper way to get in for you. Kind of made a video about this before, but I'm going into it again, tell you how to get into it. Vintage rentals. It's not new stuff that you're buying. It's used stuff that you're buying from thrift stores like Salvation Army, Goodwill, garage sales, estate sales. Or find it online, like Facebook Marketplace or whatever. Things like this. This is a vintage water goblet. Right down here, we got vintage plates. I got some on display on the wall. I got to do one, two, three more to make it look nice. This stuff was just picked up at Salvation Army and garage sales. Not all of it's vintage. Like this green glass is not 30 years old. It's just green. So we call it vintage mismatched. Like this pink glass, not vintage, but it still looks good with everything. Now, if you're getting into vintage dinnerware and glassware, you can find the vintage plates everywhere, anywhere. You can find the teacups and the saucers and all that. That's easy. Again, some of this stuff is actually not vintage. It just looks cool. It's got like good patterns. It looks like it could be vintage, but it's not. But it still works. Like, it's easy to find vintage goblets. They were made all the time. What's harder to find is vintage champagne and wine. I don't even try to find like vintage rocks or anything like that. We only do vintage goblets, champagne, and wine. A lot of times the goblets can also be used for wine as well. But like the champagne glasses, you know, this one's a cut glass one. This one is vintage. This one right here, a little weird, but it's still a champagne glass. This one's vintage. These two, this pink one and blue one, are not vintage, but once they're on the table, they look good with everything. This cut glass right here, it looks more like a wine glass. It could be used as either goblet or wine. This cut one right here, same thing, goblet or wine. This one's cool. This one's definitely vintage. This one's heavy. This one's primarily used as a goblet. But like I said, the goblet and wine can be interchangeable for the most part. Like this one's obviously wine. This stuff is just easy to get. Like I said, thrift stores, discount stores, you know, that resell things, garage sales, estate sales. Now here's a tip. When I go to a garage sale and they got a bunch of stuff that they're trying to get rid of, I just lie. I lie. And I say, hey, my sister's getting married next year and she's trying to do it on the cheap. What's your best offer on this glassware or plateware or whatever? And then I get it for like 25 cents a piece or whatever. Thrift stores, you know, it's $1, 99 cents a piece, sometimes more. The funny thing is this piece was probably bought for 99 cents, but we rent it out for $1.25. So a lot of times you're renting it out for more than you're buying it for. The downside is it takes a really long time to gather this stuff up. I took 6 months, almost every day, going to estate sales and thrift stores to buy this. I had 4 Salvation Armies in my area, and I would just make the rounds. I was also doing eBay selling at the time, so I was looking for more than just that. But this was the primary thing I was looking for. Now, it's not just vintage glassware and stuff. It can be vintage seating. Like these right here, I don't need to own 200 of those. Those are just for the bride and groom to sit. Or even this thing. This thing's not vintage, but it goes with the theme. I don't need to own 200 of those, just the 2 of them. You can find vintage seating at garage sales. You can go to antique stores where it's going to be a little bit more money, and you can get it reupholstered for fairly cheap to make it all white, or because sometimes like a floral pattern is not going to be cool. Other popular vintage items are like apple baskets, old ladders, typewriters, I don't even know all of it because we're not trying to get into that. We already do dishes, so why not do vintage dishes as well? But there's a lot you can do. It can all be transported in a SUV and trailer. You don't need to buy a truck. And it's easy to get into. It just takes time. It's a really good way to get into the rental industry. And it is kind of a niche thing too. You could only do that on the weekends and make good money. All these barns that I go to, half the time we show up, there's someone with their SUV and their trailer pulling out all this vintage stuff. We see the love seat, the couch all the time. We see wine barrels. We don't really see anyone else do these because it's easier to have a dishwasher to wash 500 pieces when they come back. You got to think dinner plate, bread and butter plate, salad plate, tea and saucer, and then all the glassware too. So it's a lot. You can do it at home. It's going to take a lot of time to wash it by hand, but you can do it as long as you're willing to hustle and put in the work. You don't need a dishwasher to do this. If you're only doing one party a weekend, you can do this at home. But anyways, I see them all the time doing this stuff. We own wine barrels too. That's considered vintage or whatever. But that's about as far as I want to get into the decor side of the business. But we see them pulling off wine barrels, tops for the wine barrels to turn it into a bar, chalkboards, pallet signs, like I said, the seating, just centerpieces that are like rustic, mason jars, just a lot of cool things. Radio flyer wagon, people find those and rent those out so they can carry the baby down the aisle and make the baby look all cute. So yeah, it's very easy. Doesn't cost a lot of money to get into. It just costs a lot of time because you got to find these things. But you can start finding these things now, build a website or Facebook page for free, and start getting the name out there. And by next summer, you can be off and running. Maybe, sure, you only got like 5 to 10 rentals, but most of these things, your first rental pays for it. It pays for it. It's insane. A stupid little teacup, probably at a garage sale. Probably got it for 25 cents. It's going for $1.25. Not with the saucer. The saucer itself is going for another $1.25. Then this plate is not vintage. It's newer, but it's got that vintage pattern. $1.25. If I got this in an estate sale, I got it for 25 cents. If I got it at Salvation Army, I got it for 99 cents. So it's crazy. We have had difficulty trying to find vintage or cool looking silverware. It's kind of hard to find that, so we're building it right now. I think we got enough for like 80 to 100 people. Like the spoon, this fork. It's hard to find this stuff like that looks cool. But like I said, slowly building that up. We go to a garage sale or estate sale or thrift store, see it, we'll buy it, and those are usually cheap, like 10 cents a piece or whatever, something crazy. And then guess what we're charging? $1 a piece. So you make your money back real quick. So this is just an idea, gets you into the rental business, starts getting some cash flow in for relatively cheap, but it is a high investment cost of time because you got to go find all this stuff. Also, family members may have some of this vintage glassware and dinnerware. We got a lot of it like that. When my grandmother passed, she gave us her old set, and we're not going to use it. Nowadays, young people don't have a nice set for when people come over to dinner. So it got put in our vintage stuff. Some lady my mother knew gave us some actually really expensive stuff. It was like that blue Japanese stuff, like a Japanese kind of picture on it. I kept some of it, like a mashed potato thing and a gravy thing and a few other things to sell on eBay because they're going for like $200 a piece. But the plates and stuff we just put into our inventory. Now, once you get going and you want to look more professional, this part gets expensive actually, is getting racks for them. It's a kind of a mess in here, but all our vintage stuff is in racks. Like all this vintage glassware is in here. It's got a blue strip on top, which means this is the water goblets, because water is blue. Not really, but it is. We have the same thing for champagne, which I don't know where that is. But the champagne is a gray rack with a yellow top, and then wine is a gray rack with a red top, because you think red wine. It is expensive to do those, but it makes you look more professional, and it's easier to transport those around. Oh, here's that blue one. Some lady just gave this to me. Someone my mother knew. This is official stuff. This is like over 100 years old. Yeah. Her grandmother owned it. And she was like, the lady who gave it to me was like 80. And her grandmother owned it. So it's really old, but really cool. So we just threw that in our vintage inventory. But anyways, it's an easy way to get in. Fairly cheap. Just takes a lot of time. Thanks for watching.